what first attracted me to the stories were and still are the characters, the adventures, the situations they get into. And this is what made me want to bring them to life on the screen, with all the things that a multi-dimensional world can do, with music and sound effects. And I think that the fact that the characters are largely steam trains, although not all of them, has an appeal, because I think the sound of a train whistle has a universal appeal.
In 1980, producer Britt Allcroft acquired the rights to adapt a series of books for television, the Railway series, written by Reverend Wilbur Awdry. It was decided that the series would be filmed with working engine props built on top of giant sets, bringing on stop-motion animation company Clearwater Features for the production, led by David Mitton and Robert Cardona, who came on as director and producer respectively. In 1983, a test pilot was produced and presented to the British television company ITV for the series to be greenlit. This test pilot, funded by Britt Allcroft after mortgaging her house to do so, was adapted from the Railway series story Down the Mine, from Railway series Volume 8, Gordon the Big Engine. The pilot was a huge success, and 26 episodes were greenlit to be filmed over the following year. During this production, Down the Mine was reshot with the matching models used in Series 1 and officially became the 25th episode of the show when the series finally aired in October 1984, with some shots of the pilot being left in the final cut that very clearly had different props and set pieces. For over 40 years, the now titled Down the Mine pilot was considered lost media, stored away deep in Mattel's archives as something we'd see bits and pieces of with behind-the-scenes photos and vague promises of an official release slated for an anniversary. Many of us fans, myself included, believed that this test pilot would never fully resurface and remain lost for the rest of time. However, a few days ago, on the 9th of May 2025, just in time for the 80th anniversary of the books, boy were we proven wrong. The Down the Mine pilot was reconstructed by the team, led by Ian McCue, digging up the old archives and rescanning the footage to digitally remaster the picture quality, thankfully not having to resort to this. They used the old narration tapes by Ringo Starr, both lines that were used in the official episode, and also the unheard takes with different lines.
Silly old board, thought Thomas. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. But this morning he had made a plan. Silly old board, he thought. He had often tried to pass it and he had never succeeded. But this morning he had made a plan. He had to push the empty trucks into one siding and pull out full ones from another.
Also, because the pilot didn't feature any music, it was composed by one of the show's original composers, Mike O'Donnell. I can only assume Junior Campbell is just relaxing in his own corner of the world right now, wondering why do you have to fall in love. The final result gives us a much clearer idea of what ITV investors would have bared witness to all those years ago. The episode that proved the stories of Sodor and its engines were destined for the TV screen. If I were to give my thoughts on the pilot itself, well, I can safely say there's one thing the pilot does better than the official episode, and that is the visual variety. These shots of Thomas talking to Annie and Clarabelle make it much clearer he's looking at them compared to the official version where it looks like he's just staring at Gordon. There's a lot more close-up shots like this one of the guard climbing aboard Clarabelle. She herself gets a close-up shot as Thomas leaves the station, as well as these shots of the engine's buffers whenever they biff into something at the mine. Both the mine collapse and the rescue sequence are much better than in the official, as we get to see both the ground collapsing beneath the rails before Thomas falls, when in the official the hole is just pre-made, and this close-up shot of Gordon's wheels spinning as he tries to pull Thomas out, when his wheels are further away in the official version and are so shrouded in steam that they're hidden from view. The variation of different shots is commendable. I do, however, agree with Thomas Theorist's reaction video that filming them from a higher angle looking down makes them more toy-like in comparison to the official version's camera angles that are either at eyes level or very low, to make the engines more giant and real looking. There's a few low-angle shots in the pilot, but for the most part it's filmed like a train set rather than a railway. I'm glad they improved upon this when filming Series 1. Where this pilot really falters visually, however, is something that can't be helped, and that's the props. I mean, where do I even start? Gordon's front looks like a plastic children's slide, his angry face looks like he's eating his own lips, the faces in general in the close-up shots feel more, threatening than the official episodes, and the piston rods, while cool to see in motion, also feel more toy-like compared to what we would eventually get. Maybe it's because I'm so used to the visuals of Series 1 that anything different feels like a disturbance in the Force, but yeah, those props in the official series were definitely a step up in quality. I'm also pretty mixed on how this pilot sounds, being honest. The sound effects are top notch, audibly it fits right in with Series 1, barring the stock whistle sound for Thomas. But with the different narration tapes for Ringo, while it's neat getting to hear these different lines for the first time, they really feel like first attempts, and lack a bit of that enthusiasm he would soon get right in the official release.
Fire and smoke, said Thomas, I'm sunk. And he was. Fire and smoke, said Thomas, I'm sunk. And he was.
I also feel like because the music doesn't use the Roland Jupiter 6, these compositions, despite being tunes we're all familiar with, feel a little out of place in a way I can't really describe, though it is very wholesome that Mike O'Donnell came back specially for this. I should stress that I'm not trying to trash the pilot for these faults, quite the opposite. The fact this thing even saw the light of day is a miracle, and its very existence shows exactly what Britt Allcroft, David Mitton, and the rest of the production crew learned from when they made Series 1 following the pilot's success. The official version of Down the Mine is the superior version, and that's the point. But what this pilot and its corresponding episode both showcase best of all is why Down the Mine was the perfect pilot story for Thomas the Tank Engine and friends, of which I would like to present to you all 5 key points in favour of this statement. Starting with Number 1, a limited cast. In this pilot story we see only 2 characters, Thomas and Gordon. That way, the audience watching is not overwhelmed by several new faces they just have to get used to. Instead, it's just these 2 guys. But, with this shot of other trains moving in the back and foreground as Thomas goes to the mine, it subtly implies the existence of other engine characters in this story world. Talking engines just like Thomas and Gordon that we can and will get to see in other episodes. Immediately, this story establishes who our main character Thomas is. He's a small, cheeky tank engine who finds great enjoyment from teasing the other engines who are much bigger than him.
Annie, Clarabelle, do you know what I think it is? It's ditch water.
He thinks he knows better than a danger sign meant to keep him safe, and rightfully pays the price for his cocky attitude. We also learn about Gordon, who, despite us feeling sympathetic for when Thomas makes fun of him, we see that he too is an engine who will stoop to that same low as he laughs at Thomas for falling down the mine.
Down a mine, is he? Ha ha ha, laughed Gordon. What a joke.
Thomas is the one who learns a lesson, but Gordon ain't no saint. Both are as flawed as one another. There is no clear good and bad character in the story. But with their flaws, they find some common ground and form an alliance.
Shall we form an alliance? You help me and I'll help you. Right you are, agreed Thomas.
Both engines may be childish, but neither are narrow-minded to not question if what they're doing is wrong. 2 very layered characters that we get to know the ins and outs of by the story's end. And if there are indeed other engines on this railway, suffice to say that they will be just as layered and entertaining to watch. Right out of the gate, the audience wants to see more of these talking steam engines. Oh yeah, we also see the Fat Controller for a bit. The head of the railway who definitely has an authority over the engines when he scolds Thomas, but still looks out for their well-being, almost like a caring manager in the workplace. Number 2, continuity. This one is a bit tricky to discuss because, well, only the official version references the events of the previous story off the rails where Gordon runs into a ditch and so explains Thomas's joke about smelling ditch water.
Not long ago he had fallen into a dirty ditch. Thomas enjoyed teasing him about it.
But this pilot was only reconstructed with narration tapes from Ringo, so I can only assume the original narration did indeed reference off the rails. My point is, If the episode has a reference to the events of another episode, it lets the audience know that Thomas the Tank Engine is a show that features continuity, episodic character arcs, gradually introducing new faces and places, the latter of which having consistency with where certain places are on the railway. Journeys that audiences will want to tune in for and watch from the very start. Instead of episodes feeling like they conclude in a status quo way, it's one long ongoing story, like a big Thomas the Tank Engine film, only on the TV. Okay, this is a brief interruption from Luke from the future. Turns out the visual script and the dialogue script used for the pilot were just right there on the Wikipedia gallery. Like, all I had to do was look there. I don't know how I missed these, and reading them now, nope, there's no mention of the previous episode Off the Rails, so everything that I just said praising the continuity of the pilot episode only attributes to the official episode of Down the Mine, not the pilot. Yeah, I'm not perfect, guys. Number 3. Real Railway Incidents. As the episodes are based on the Railway series books, they are adapting stories that are largely based on real railway events, just as Wilbur Awdry intended. Down the Mine was famously based on the Lindell Railway incident that happened on the 22nd of September 1892. A Furness Railway locomotive number 115, a D-Class 060, was busy shunting in the sidings. The driver, Thomas Postlethwaite, spotted cracks in the ground starting to open up. He immediately shut off steam, and no sooner than he and the firemen had jumped for their lives, the earth had opened up a huge 30-foot hole both in width and in depth, with the engine falling front first into the hole as both driver and fireman stared in disbelief. The cause of such a huge crater is believed to be from a long history of subsidence, as passing trains were required to slow down before crossing what was deemed shaky ground with dips and hollows, as well as 2 levels of mine shafts below the railway, with miners in the lower level claiming they could hear trains above their heads and believed there would one day be an accident. This incident was indeed the inspiration behind Awdry's story in the books, explaining word for word the dangers of heavy steam engines travelling over unstable grounds, which the TV episode would also do.
Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Though strong enough to hold up trucks, their roofs could not bear the weight of engines.
Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Though strong enough to hold up trucks, their roofs could not bear the weight of engines.
And when Thomas disobeys the danger sign, we see exactly what would have happened with the D1 class engine on the Lindell Railway. Thomas runs as casually as possible over the dangerous tracks, the ground beneath him gives way, and he falls front first into the hole that opens up. This is a huge appeal to Awdry's stories, and by extension, the first 5 or so series of the show. They are all based on things that actually happened with real-life steam engines and railways. It's not a series of babyfied, unrealistic stories like Thomas has to take the stinky cheese train and then, uh-oh, he spilled the stinky cheese everywhere, or Thomas has to deliver the bubble liquid, but uh-oh, he spilled it onto the road so the fat controller spins into a muddy ditch.
Actually had diarrhea is what's happened here.
No, most of what we see in the classic era of Thomas is based on real railway events. By choosing Down the Mine, the audience sees firsthand that the stories they're in for with Thomas the Tank Engine are very grounded and abide by the rules of the real world. Most of the time, anyway. The more real the events the stories are based on, the more real the universe itself feels to the people watching. And Down the Mine is probably one of the best stories you could have picked to portray that, as the visual of an engine facing down into a hole is very memorable, just as striking to see as it would have been for the real-life crew who saw the real-life event. Speaking of which, another point in favour with choosing Down the Mine is how the ending differs to what really happened with the Lindell Railway incident. Number 4. Escapism. After number 115 had fallen into the hole, there was a rescue attempt with breakdown gangs using a crane and tools. The men successfully uncoupled the tender and pulled it to safety, but lifting the engine itself would be a huge undertaking. On top of being distracted by a flock of passengers who had been due to leave on a train for Barrow-in-Furness and Carnforth, as they stood dangerously close to look at the hole and spread rumours that a whole passenger train had fallen into the hole and had been killed or injured. The men took a refreshments break, and when they returned, they saw that the hole had deepened to 60 feet and had also widened, making the rescue attempt impossible, as the engine had now sunk into complete darkness and was eclipsed from view. It took 300 wagons of ballast to fill up the chasm until the ground was solid enough for the rails to be rebuilt over the surface. Number 115 was therefore buried and remains underground to this very day. This kind of story would obviously never work in a children's book, unless, I don't know, maybe if it was written by the Brothers Grimm instead. A sentient engine getting buried alive sounds right up their alley. Anyway, the difference with Down the Mine compared to the real life incident is that, of course, Thomas is able to be rescued from the hole, highlighting something else that Audrey's stories did that the TV series would go on to establish. A sense of escapism. Not just the fact that the trains all have faces and can talk. Not just the fact that there is a railway with mostly steam engines when in today's day and age it's mostly diesels that operate the line, but with how even the worst accidents for a locomotive can be resolved. The engines in the show will sustain damage from these accidents and will face the consequences by being reprimanded for their careless behaviour, but they will always be repaired.
But we had to have a happy ending, so Thomas had to be able to be hauled out.
Is the happy ending important to your story?
Oh, the happy ending is important. The engine, however much it's misbehaved, has got to express sorrow and be restored.
This is a story world that follows the real world laws, but every mistake is fixable. Until Series 5, where they just casually show an engine falling to its death in the swamps. Oh, Series 5, you mischievous little childhood nightmare generator, you. Number 5, respect and friendship. Thomas and Gordon find great enjoyment from disrespecting each other, a common action people will do when they are at their lowest. Like the only way they can feel good about themselves or feel on top is by mocking others and making them feel smaller, when in reality, they themselves are the smaller, pathetic individual. Only through Thomas having his accident in the mine does he see eye to eye with Gordon, with how lucky he is for surviving such a dangerous fall into a hole that could have easily gone a lot worse, and if he had continued to follow a life of insulting others and holding himself above them, he would have never gotten himself out of this horrible scenario, as he realises how good of a friend Gordon actually is for rescuing him despite how Thomas insulted him earlier. Then and only then do they find respect for each other when they form their alliance, which I feel would create a sense of comfort with the audience watching. For people who feel like they've hit rock bottom or have nowhere else to go, all they have to do is put on an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine like Down the Mine and have their anxieties reassured, telling them, yes, you may be feeling at your lowest right now after a huge mistake you made, of which you are facing the consequences for, but there is always a way out. There is always someone who will help you out of that dark pit, even if it's someone you weren't expecting. Everything is going to be alright. All of this taught with the simplicity of talking trains. So, with a limited but in-depth cast, a dedication to follow continuity, based on real railway events to make the stories feel grounded but also with a sense of escapism and hope, while teaching a very important message of learning to respect one another the hard way, and finding your truest friends while at your lowest, who will stick by you for a lifetime. It's really no surprise that Down the Mine of all stories was chosen to be the pilot episode, one that would vessel Thomas the Tank Engine and friends from the board meetings at ITV, to our TV screens, to across the oceans, to the silver screen, to the internet and further across the globe, but most of all, to our hearts.
I'm in disgrace, Gordon went on pathetically. I feel very low. I'm in disgrace too, said Thomas. Why, so you are, Thomas. We're both in disgrace. Shall we form an alliance? What was it? An alliance, Thomas. United we stand, together we fall, said Gordon grandly. You help me, and I'll help you. How about it? Right you are, said Thomas. Good, that's settled, rumbled Gordon.
If the audience embrace the characters and the stories, whom they first discover on the screen, maybe they first discover them in the books, but maybe they first discover them on the screen, that they will then want these characters and stories as part of their life.
And buffer to buffer the Allies puffed home,